Hello, everyone, faculty, staff, students, Board of Trustee members, and friends of Defiance College. Today is an exciting day. You just heard my introduction, so you know that the McMaster family gave us a gift to improve the human condition. We're going to discuss that today in terms of congressional bipartisanship. And I am pleased to welcome my former colleague and friend, Mr. Robert Mills, better known as Bobby Mills. And he holds degrees in English from the University of Maryland, and he holds his Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown. He has worked on both houses of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. He has also worked on both sides of the political parties. So he's worked with both Republicans and Democrats. His CV, his curriculum vitae, is extensive, and you would be very impressed. What we want to do today is to be able to let you hear some dialogue from Mr. Mills, and then I will ask him a series of questions to dig into some of what he says in his introductory comments. Please know that Bobby is a co-founder of the Advocacy Group, which is a lobby firm in Washington, D.C. that works with educational institutions. He and I were colleagues at Damon College. So for those of you who don't know, that was my former post. And what we did together was work on presidential priorities and try to get them done. Bobby is smart, he's active, he's a humble man. I asked him to share his experience and not to be humble today. I asked him to do some name dropping so that you could get a sense of what someone who started a career at 22, 23 years of age can do and how that progresses because of ongoing relationships that we develop over our lifetime. As you know, I use the African proverb to say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So Bobby and I have learned how to go together in our different careers, and we've also learned to go together as colleagues. So Bobby Mills, welcome to Defiance College via Delaware.
Well, thank you very much. I'm truly honored to have this opportunity to join the distinguished list of previous McMaster Symposium speakers who've been privileged to participate in your celebration of the mission, goals, and achievements of the McMaster School at Defiance College. In preparing for today, I was awestruck in looking back over the previous 15 years of this symposium at the Hall of Fame list of impressive speakers whose backgrounds and contributions to the overarching goal of the McMaster School are extraordinary. Thanks to the generosity of the McMaster family, you have been blessed with a range of experts from legal scholars, artists, authors, to environmentalists, playwrights, labor leaders, even a defector from the Soviet Union who served in the United States at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Your speakers and your journal reports show that the McMaster School and its leaders have no boundaries in their quest to address issues here and in foreign countries, where individual liberties are frequently under assault, and to work toward the goal of the McMaster School in improving the human condition. At the same time, I believe that I may be the first symposium keynote speaker whose professional background is primarily grounded in Washington, and more importantly, in 4 decades of working first under 4 presidents as a congressional staff member, and as a government relations specialist and advocate working with Congress, the executive branch, vice presidents, and the administration of another 4 presidents. Most recently, I had the privilege to serve as a senior advisor to the president of Damon College, and an even greater privilege to work on the president's cabinet with your distinguished president of Defiance College, Dr. Rich Ann Mankey. Truly an honor, and I'm so pleased to be here today. There never may be a more appropriate time in our history to address the divisiveness that surrounds us, to square up on the global challenges that seem overwhelming, and right here at home, to demand our national leaders, especially Congress, that it help regain our national grip on policies, programs, and civility that will be required to put our security, our unity, and our quest to improve the human condition back on page 1 of our national priorities and not in the appendices. A divided nation has caused our leaders to lose sight of the core issues that should unite us, including the underlying vision of the McMaster School to protect our liberties and improve the human condition, both here and internationally. But our country has an impressive history of bipartisanship and of bouncing back from the challenges that divide us and from catastrophic events that have united us. Unfortunately, we're in one of those divisive periods, and we need to bounce back starting right now. History has also shown that America is resilient. Congress has shown it can be bipartisan and get things done. And the world has watched with envy as the American people have rebounded time and time again to unite behind efforts to protect our democracy and to recalibrate our focus on our individual liberties and address things that make our lives better. We have a golden opportunity to demonstrate the ability to bounce back, to unite and show the world that our leaders can work collaboratively together to get things done. I've been very fortunate in my career to participate in some seminal moments in our modern history and in developing policy initiatives that are examples of a better day, when bipartisanship was not a dirty word, but the standard our leaders expected to apply in pursuit of the common good. Times when leaders were able to set aside political differences and work on projects to improve our lives and the human condition among our fellow democracies around the globe. And times when Congress and the president worked in tandem, not at cross purposes, to achieve national goals that protected our freedoms and strive to improve the human condition in our country. My message to all of you is that in order to meet the goals and vision of the McMaster School, to protect our individual liberties and improve the human condition, the nation and our leaders must break through the divisiveness and ideological polarization that plagues us now and heal our country. So let's take a brief look at some of the most divisive periods in the past through the lens of my experience as both a congressional staffer and lobbyist, how we came together to heal, often by laying aside political differences to get important work done. And then Dr. Mackey and I will talk through how we might come out of this current period of divisiveness to be more unified and to meet the goals of the McMaster School that are just as important now as they were when the legacy of the McMaster family first began. So how does a nation respond to divisiveness? One could arguably go back all the way to the 18th century when James Madison, George Mason, Alexander Hamilton, and others with powdered wigs were trying to navigate a post-revolution storm within a skeptical citizenry that was divided on the fundamental issue of maintaining a confederacy of states as opposed to a republic. In fact, the aftermath of the American Revolution period constituted the very definition of divisiveness in the context of our emerging democracy. And the result was we healed and we created a nation that is now the United States of America. Then there was Vietnam. The tear gas that blanketed the quad at the University of Maryland when I was a student covering my face and trying to go to classes is a vivid reminder of how divisive this period was in our history. Brother against brother, war heroes mocked as they returned home in uniforms. And the result is how things have changed for the better, with our veterans now treated with appropriate reverence and routine statements of thank you for your service. We healed again. Then there was Watergate. As a 26-year-old congressional staffer, seems so long ago, I experienced up close and personal the effort in Congress to impeach President Richard Nixon for crimes committed during his presidency and for the infamous break-in at the Watergate Hotel. In fact, I covered the Judiciary Committee hearing when the vote was taking place on whether or not to impeach the president. Standing out in my mind was a statement by then freshman Republican Congressman William Cohen on July 25th, 1974, a Republican sitting in final judgment of a Republican president that he supported. Listen to how prescient were the words of Congressman Cohen, a statement that could just as easily have been delivered last year during the Judiciary Committee deliberations on impeachment. Quote, "The most serious and dangerous threat to our very society and liberties occurs when those in positions of power undertake to turn neutral instruments of government into agents of vengeance and retribution against private citizens who engage in the exercise of their constitutionally protected freedoms. If we are to have confidence in the concept of even-handed treatment under the law, then we simply cannot condone such intolerable conduct. Again, this was a Republican freshman congressman, probably been on the job for only a month or two. The result was that the president resigned with bipartisan urgings from his own Republican supporters, backed by Democrats. Gerald Ford took office and the country rallied behind him as the country began to heal again. Then in the 80s, there was a war on drugs and the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 that I was privileged to participate in. The country was tiring from the incessant flow of drugs across our borders and the growing populace of young people who fell victim to the sale of those drugs in the United States. It had become a crisis. The result was the country rallied. Congress in 1986 passed the most comprehensive anti-drug abuse legislation in our history, with a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and strong bipartisan support from Democrats in the House and Senate crafting a bill in less than 5 months. The result was I was proud to have worked with now President Joe Biden, then ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Bob Dole, the Republican leader in the Senate, Robert Byrd, the Democratic Senate leader, and the president's drug czar, former President George H.W. Bush, in getting this bill passed. And I still have a pen from President Ronald Reagan, who signed the bill into law on October 27th, 1986. And just before that, I was invited to the White House to have tea with the vice president, who's the drug czar. And it was one of the coolest moments, I think, in my career. Couldn't have been a more interesting experience. Then we have the periods of impeachment, which are by definition symbols of unrest and political divisiveness. In 1998, Clinton had become a symbol of the divisions that were growing in the country, but even during this battle between the White House and the Congress, the people demanded and got some of the most important legislation passed before the turn of the century, including the Family and Medical Leave Act, allowing workers to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to attend to family concerns. The AmeriCorps Act, allowing people to volunteer for national service and earn money for college. 2 major gun control bills, believe it or not, including the famous Brady bill that imposed a waiting period and background checks for purchasing handguns and an assault weapon ban, and a bipartisan tax relief bill that created the Roth IRAs and tax credits for children and college tuition that exists today. And finally, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was contentious but came together in a collaborative bipartisan way. The 2 recessions in 1987 and 2009 were what the economic turmoil was facing us in both of those periods. And the country looked to its leaders in the executive branch to find solutions to what was splitting the haves and the have-nots, and to find common ground to forge policies and stimulus bills to put the country back on track. In 2009, together, Congress and a Democratic president saved the automobile industry and other businesses that could have gone under but for bipartisan action of the president and the Congress. The result, we survived. America bounced back. People returned to work, and the economy rebounded with significant growth beyond 1987 and 2009. Then it's hard to forget the impeachments last year. The jury is still out on whether the divisions that have been attributable to both Barack Obama and former President Trump will ultimately be healed. 2 impeachments, regardless of one's position on the merits, is an ironclad sign of great divisiveness and unrest in the nation. Associated with this period that we remember so well is Black Lives Matter movement, the trial of George Floyd that is going on right now, the contentious 2020 election, and the historic January 6th attack on the Capitol and our democratic values brought divisiveness into most vivid focus. A new president elected by winning unrealistically states like Georgia, the election of the first Jewish and African-American senators ever from the state of Georgia, and the first ever woman vice president and woman of color, all are symbols of the country trying to go in new and historically significant directions, while making national statements about the country, how the country must, and in my judgment will, heal and mitigate those divisions. And then there was the pandemic. Up close and personal, it still persists. Who knew that mask wearing and individual liberties would be spoken about in the same context? people cooped up in their homes on the heels of the divisive election of 2020, and finger pointing at everyone from the president to Congress to science advisors. The country's divisions were magnified in the face of the worst health crisis in nearly a century. But we are seeing Americans rise out of this abyss and going back to work, wearing masks, a record time, and I give great credit to the president, the previous president, President Trump, for getting 3 vaccines started and through a process to help protect our citizens. And 4 pandemic relief bills passed in less than 6 months, all but one of which was with bipartisan support and warp speed. And finally, January 6, 2021, how can we forget? The very offices that were attacked is where I used to have an office in the Senate. So it was pretty personal to me to see people going into that hallowed ground that I will always consider to be home for me when I was in the Congress. Perhaps no greater signal that the country is dangerously divided was that attack along racial, ethnic, and ideological lines. So we've faced divisiveness. We've overcome those divisions with bold, bipartisan national efforts to heal the country. And we will do so again. In fact, we're in the middle of that healing process as we speak. But we have hard work truly ahead of us to try to heal, and that which continues to divide us, threatening individual liberties and damage the human condition here at home. And we need to focus on things such as voting rights, the threat of white supremacists, and threats against Asian Americans, African Americans, and other ethnic groups that have become increasing targets for those who blame them for everything from the COVID virus to election fraud. Responding to the protests in many states over the cases of alleged police overzealousness against minorities, and to the unfortunate ongoing connection of Muslim Americans to 9/11. I pray that we can purge these divisive threats to the human condition and right here at home. And the human condition appears to be returning to its proper priority place in our policies and our national and international initiatives. I would argue that in the midst of these historic challenges, we are helping to restore the human condition to its proper priority place in these policies, both nationally and internationally. One important byproduct of the divisiveness that seems to overwhelm all of us over the past 18 months is some repair work that's being done both home and internationally to improve the human condition, a cornerstone of the McMaster School legacy. One, the George Floyd trial has brought both white and Black Americans together to not just achieve a just verdict in that case, but to begin to heal the racial division that plagued not only African American communities, but the Asian and Muslim communities alike. That's a good thing coming out of this tragedy and others like it. Second of all, the most controversial election in recent history. Democrats are trying to reach out to Republicans and Republicans to Democrats, with the president, now a Democrat, trying to find common ground with Republicans on some of the most sustained, lingering, divisive issues facing America on gun reform, healthcare, minimum wage, voting rights, and restoring our international alliances so that America does not have to go it alone in fighting to improve the human condition for its citizens and for citizens throughout the world. The Paris Climate Change Agreement, regardless of one's position on the substance of it, a return to multilateral international agreements designed to improve the human condition for the many is a good thing and something that it appears our nation embraces as it returns to this agreement with dozens of our closest international allies. Iran, again, whether one agrees with the decision in the past administration to leave the agreement or not, starting a dialogue with Iran through multilateral, not just unilateral, unity of purpose is a good thing. Whether it will ultimately change behavior, that remains to be seen, but the departure from the Iranian agreement has caused a fissure in our united front among our allies. Now this is another chance to heal those divisions and pursue an agreement that, if successful, will make things safer for all of us. Human rights violations in China and other countries, the growing groundswell of international alarm at what is happening to children and the individual liberties in Xinjiang region of China, has put a spotlight on these and other human rights violations in China. The return to unity among the world's great democracies, including the US, is taking these human rights threats to the human condition and put them on the front pages of our mind and spirits. And that's a good thing as we leverage the resources of our democracies to bring about change and hopefully promote healing of these attacks on ordinary citizens. And the clarion call against white supremacy, these domestic threats to the human condition have forged a climate of renewed focus on equal justice issues, income inequality, racism, and the plight of our citizens who continue to struggle to achieve the American dream, both in our inner cities and in rural America. In closing, Dr. Mankey and I will elaborate on some of these themes in our question and answer exchange. And I'll hit on a couple of ideas that I believe our elected officials can do to do their part to kickstart the healing process. But I wanted to end my presentation with two statements. One from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt from, believe it or not, January 6th, 1941 State of the Union message. And one from the current President of the United States, Joe Biden, in a letter to me, of all people, that I just received last Saturday in the mail. On January 6, 1941, Franklin Roosevelt delivered his famous Four Freedoms State of the Union message to Congress and to a nation on the brink of war against overseas dictators. He was calling Congress and the nation to action, to provide the necessary resources to fight against the monolithic German forces that were already attacking Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Most importantly, FDR reinforced the overarching principles of democracy, among them the preservation of civil liberties for all. And he articulated the four essential human freedoms that the world must embrace, including economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants elsewhere in the world. But his concluding remarks resonated the most with me as he told Congress, quote, "This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights and keep them. Our strength is our unity of purpose." Then, just to show Dr. Mankey and the McMaster School and I are not the only ones thinking about the need to come together, just last Saturday, I got a letter from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who happens to have a summer residence about 2 miles from where I live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. It was a lovely note, responding to my open invitation for him to come and meet some of my Delaware constituents here in my development on the beach this summer to have a Coke and sit and talk about politics. And congratulating him on his victory in November, President Biden said, among other things, quote, "Our country faces many challenges, and the road we will travel together will be one of the most difficult in our history. It is time for Americans to set aside their differences, to try to understand one another, and strive to make the promise of a just, prosperous, and secure nation a reality for everyone." And the president ends his letter to me by saying, "I look forward to writing the next great chapter of the American story with you." I can't think of a better way to end my presentation. And I thank all of you for your attention. Next time I get something from the White House, I won't be so quick to almost toss it in the trash. So I was delighted to open it and find that note from the president. So with that, I'm more than happy to turn it back to Dr. Mankey and we can go through some questions.
Well, thank you, Bobby Mills. And for those of you, I'll do my reaction, which is clapping, and I'll do that for all of us who will be listening in on this session tomorrow morning. So thank you so much, Bobby, for sharing about 4 decades of experience and relationships in Washington, D.C. Very much appreciated. So let's start with this question. What are your thoughts about supporting policies and leaders for these United States rather than for specific political agendas?
Well, that's excellent. That's sort of captures the whole essence of this. Even before Donald Trump became president and going back to the Obama administration, the two parties were lurching hard to their ideological poles, left and right, leaving little room to find common ground. President Barack Obama tried to reach out to the Republicans during the recession, and he was successful. And I give credit to both parties for that. However, the Senate Majority Leader made it very clear that his key political agenda was trying to thwart the efforts of the Obama White House. And that, I think, set a tone that I don't believe has changed much until now. The previous administration threw some gasoline on this lack of partisanship. And I think it already was in motion that the Democrats were lurching left, the Republicans were lurching right, and the middle ground seemed to be something that could never be achieved. But now we're starting to see a slow and hopefully sustained pivot away from both ideological poles to the middle of the political spectrum. And I give both some Republicans and the new president some credit for that. Outspoken political statements about joining Biden and heading back to the middle have been done by Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and even a prospective presidential candidate for 2024, Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, who, if no one has ever heard him speak, they should do so. He is a brilliant young man and has a brilliant future ahead, in my judgment. But Biden's overture to the Republicans and moderates are causing a degree of angst among the progressives in the Democratic Party. And I think that is a good sign that if the progressives are mad at Biden, after he's put a lot of progressives into his cabinet, and the Republicans are mad at Biden because he's spending too much money or is not listening to them as much as they think, that probably means we're getting back to the get things done middle of the road politically. And I think that's a very positive thing. And here are some things that I think we can take advantage of and forge that middle of the road area where we can get bipartisan support. One of which is a Marshall Plan on healthcare. I think it's fair to say that anybody who was laid off, including my two daughters during the pandemic, the first thing that probably came to their mind besides not having a paycheck is, what am I going to do about healthcare? So I think we have an opportunity to put our partisanship aside and forge an agreement on how we can truly make a difference in crafting a new healthcare program for the country that's not Medicare for all and is just totally based on the private sector. I also believe, and this is not, I'm not saying this because I'm talking to a private college, I truly believe we should invest in private colleges and education. There are moves afoot all over the country to provide free education in public schools, community colleges, including New York, where Dr. Mankey and I served at one point. But I truly believe that the real bellwether for our country is in private nonprofit colleges. And they have shown time and time again, they are the ones that graduate the most students. They're the ones that have that connection with ordinary Americans in a way that I don't believe the others can. So I would do a healthy investment in private education to get those students back into educational circumstances. And I think this is something where Congress would agree. I also think there are some national service programs that were allowed to lapse in the last administration, which I believe we can reconstitute. Programs where you provide service in the education and healthcare, international spaces, and for that you get college tuition rebate or college credit. I think getting young people involved in national service programs is a great thing and something that goes back all the way to the Kennedy years, when the Peace Corps was started during the Sergeant Shriver era. And then lastly, infrastructure. It's not, I'm not making this up because it's already out there, but I think infrastructure, including broadband in areas like Ohio, which need that, is an area where there has been proven bipartisanship shown in getting major transportation bills done. I've worked on what was called SAFE-TLU, Surface Transportation Bill, T21, where everything from roads, bridges to waste treatment plants were a focal point. And I think if Biden is smart, he will take a lot of the clutter out of his big bill and try to do the infrastructure bill as a standalone. And if he does that, I think he'll get significant Republican support. So those are some things that I think are achievable with heading down the center of that political spectrum. And I'm hoping that Congress will take my advice, which I haven't asked for yet, but hopefully they'll be watching this and see it.
Thank you for responding to that question. You know, you keep a positive attitude. So amid these troubling times, you do stay positive. You believe in both people and in our ability as Americans to come together for our country. Some who have seen less of the internal workings of Washington, D.C. than you have get discouraged and feel deflated, hopeless sometimes. You've seen it all, yet you stay positive. To what do you attribute that ability to be positive in the midst of some of these tumultuous times?
Well, I am optimistic. I mean, you know, with all of our problems and all the angst that we have and the tensions that we see, this is a great country. And it's still the country that everybody looks up to, whether we think so or not. And I guess I attribute my positive approaches. That short answer is because I've seen it the way it was. I was there when everything was bipartisan. You couldn't get a bill passed if it didn't have a Republican and a Democrat on it as sponsors. It wouldn't happen. You don't see that now, but it's coming back. And I've been actively engaged both on the Hill and as an advocate in the private sector in trying to forge ways to work with both sides of the aisle. I worked for a Republican chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mark Hatfield of Oregon. I worked for a Democratic chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and John Stennis of Mississippi. So I was fortunate to work on a committee that was traditionally bipartisan, and it worked very, very well. So now we have a president who was actually there when I was there. So he saw how this worked, how working with, he was criticized for working with Strom Thurmond and some of the segregationist senators on trying to get things done in the civil rights arena, and it was successful. Going back to working with Republicans, regardless of political ideology. Ben Sasse is a very conservative guy. He's worked very closely with Ron Wyden on some a very liberal member of the Senate from Oregon on issues. So we lived in an era when bipartisanship was the norm. It wasn't the aberration or the exception. The 1986 drug bill that I talked about was a perfect example of that. I worked with Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, and you talk about two different political parts of the spectrum. They were it, but they were personal good friends. They dined together. Their families got together, and that's the way it was. I think the pandemic bills are a symbol of why I am optimistic, is because we passed 4 of the most comprehensive attacks on this pandemic and an economic recovery package in less than half a year. I mean, I've never seen that. I don't think it's ever happened in our country. So these are the kinds of things that make me very optimistic about what's forthcoming. And I believe that one thing I do want to say, I don't think Joe Biden is going to run for a second term. He won't admit it. His staff won't admit it. They're probably threatened with losing their jobs if they say it. But that gives him 4 years to not think about reelection, not thinking about what he has to do politically, but what he can get done in a finite window of time, working with the Republicans to get stuff done. So I think that's a positive thing. So I'm very upbeat about the next 4 years and the future as well. And that's why, because I was there, and a lot of the people who were there are now in power and in the administration. And I think that bodes very well for our country.
Well, thank you for sharing how you stay positive. It's important that we have a different perspective, especially from someone who is an insider. You know that I asked you to go against your pleasantly humble nature to let our students see how careers and relationships develop over a lifetime. So here you've described sitting at a committee table with Joe Biden, now getting a note from him as a president of the United States after you've invited him to have Cokes and meet his Delaware constituents. So that is a symbol of how the relationships develop over a lifetime. We just don't know how things are going to turn out. So as our students embark on their careers after graduation, what is your best advice to help them live our mission, which is to know, to understand, to lead, and to serve. And that helps us maintain and improve the human condition, just as Harold and Helen McMaster wanted this school to help us do.
Well, that's a great question. Boy, giving advice to some of the smartest students in the country is a humbling experience here. A short answer that I most recently gave to my two daughters, who were both laid off during the economic crisis, were sort of at a crossroads in their careers anyway, and sort of asked, what should I do? My short answer was, at this stage of your life, figure out what you're passionate about, what you really want to do, and then figure out a way to get paid to do it. And actually, both of them have done that, and they're in fields now that I think are ones that they're comfortable with, they're successful in, and they're back on their feet in areas that they probably hadn't thought about before. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily the advice I would give right away to your great students, but it's sort of a starting point. Your students have had the privilege of participating in and embracing the McMaster mission and have special gifts and opportunities. And I think that first, no matter what your educational skill sets would be, I would figure out a way first to work in a state, local, or federal government agency for a period of time. It will give you a sense of how policies are developed, how they're made, how they're implemented, and whether or not they work, or you see from the inside whether they work to help improve the lives of those people are paid to serve. And I'm biased because I'm a political nerd, but if you can work for an elected official or for a period of time, it is truly one of the most rewarding experiences I ever had. You don't have to make a career out of it like I almost did after managing a drugstore all through college. I mean, drugstore, Congress, you can see the relationship there, I'm sure. But it's well worth a couple of years, perhaps while you're going to graduate school at night. I went to law school at night, so if I can do it, trust me, everybody can do it. And going to school or doing some postgraduate training of some kind that's of interest to you. So see if you can get inside a government entity and work for a while. Second, regardless of your first job out of college, especially with your training and your grounding in the McMaster School mission, I would strongly recommend you seek out a nonprofit organization and work with them as sort of the sidecar in your motorcycle as you go down your career path. For example, the Red Cross, Boys and Girls Clubs, a national domestic violence organization that helps women or children who have suffered abusive situations in their family life, or get out and work in international service organizations that reach out to refugees and their families. This is something that was done at Damon College, and I know that Dr. Mankey was very supportive of that kind of thing. And Buffalo, believe it or not, had a huge amount of refugees. And we reached out, it was a very rewarding experience. So I, for example, was on the board of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington, which was the third largest chapter next to the Michael Jordan chapter in Chicago and one other. And I worked with them on government relations things and worked to get them funding. And that was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. So find something like that that is in your wheelhouse where you would think that would be something where you could provide service. Third, I would find a way to participate in an international postgraduate program of some kind. There's so much great work that McMaster has done in the international arena. See if there's some areas where you can get involved. Haiti continues to suffer from, I don't think it ever recovered from the hurricanes. And there are countries like that that really need your help. And I think would be a great way to forge your opportunities. So in sum, all of these will work together to take the experience you've had at Defiance College and the aura of the spectrum of the McMaster School to get into some of these nonprofit areas while you're pursuing your career. So find something you love to do. Get involved with government if you can, at least temporarily, at least for a part of your career, and work with nonprofits, because I think that'll really give you a holistic feel for how you can proceed through whatever career you have, whether it's nursing or business or so forth. So those are some ideas I would have for your students.
Thank you. Great ideas. And students, if you're involved with the McMaster School now, you soon, as the pandemic lets us travel again, will have opportunities even as undergraduate students. And, our students have told us, Bobby, that what they've learned many things. What continues to rise to the top is the ability to be adaptable as we move forward. And if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it is that we need to be adaptable as we live in ambiguity and manage expectations and loss. So thank you for that great advice.
Not only that, the pandemic shows what a small world it is.
Right.
One airplane ride and a pandemic starts.
Yes, very much so. Same way in 1918, one walk across the country and it
Absolutely
happened then. So Bobby, you talked you and I have talked for years about equality in America. You mentioned specifically in your comments today, Black, Asian, Muslim Americans. I know that you have 2 daughters and you have said that to our audience today. So I know that you include women in these ethnic and racial groups. We could add an endless list, but other groups like Jewish Americans and those with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ community. Knowing how politics works though, how would you suggest we most effectively and efficiently address systemic racism in America?
Yeah, that is probably one of the most important questions you could ask. And in my lifetime, I remember vividly, I went to a private school in Washington, D.C., Sidwell Friends School. And my junior year, 1966, we had the first African-American student at Sidwell Friends. So I looked around me and I could see, I went to Louisiana in the 60s and there were still bathrooms just for African-Americans. So it's not like this is something that happened in 1776. This is something that's been with us for a while. And I think the fast forwarding to where we are now, the unfortunate cases with the police and Black Lives Matters and so forth has really put it front and center. But I'm very optimistic because my kids who are in their 30s, when they see this systemic racism, they scratch their head and say, what's going on here? Because they weren't used to what I saw in the 60s because they weren't here. So I think there's 2 areas. One, on an economic front and on a law enforcement front. Let's put it in those 2 boxes. First of all, the core of the systemic racism that exists is that African Americans and other ethnic groups have been either by choice or by pushed by white Americans have ended up in situations where there's an economic pandemic that has hit their lives in those inner cities and in rural areas where there's a lot of rural poor areas in Delaware still. And I think what we need to do is we need to pump historic amounts of support into job creation, minority-owned small business startups, educational opportunities for minority children in inner cities and in rural areas where they live and work, and have transformational job training, not just on the edges, but truly taking the citizens in those areas and giving them the same opportunity everyone has to pivot as the economy is pivoting into some of these new technologies, new areas of work. So a significant Marshall Plan, if you will, investment in the citizens who unfortunately have been left behind is something we need to do, and not just talk about it anymore, but do it significantly. I also believe that the threat of domestic terrorism is very real. And it's not something that I dreamed up or that came from other administrations. The last Trump administration, I give them a lot of credit for this. They identified domestic terrorism, including white supremacist groups, as the number one terrorist threat to the United States. Not Al-Qaeda, not Hezbollah, not the Taliban, the number one threat. So as the part of my barbell of the economic investment in our minority communities so that they can grow and prosper. But also, I would recommend that, like Robert Kennedy did back when he was the Attorney General, is to form a domestic terrorism group within the Justice Department to not just give lip service to, but really go after the systemic underpinnings of domestic terrorism in the United States, including white supremacist groups and those that threaten ethnic groups, the gay community, the Jewish community, and so forth, and really just get that under control in a significant way. I think those two things together will really show not just theory, but truly historic action to really make those two a key part of helping fight racism and the domestic threat to ethnic groups that we see in this country. And finally, I believe that a key part of that, I come back to you, is that we need to really invest in our colleges and universities to give every opportunity for those kids to climb out of that cycle of poverty and truly have an opportunity to get the kind of education that the students at Defiance are getting and elsewhere. We've made an excellent investment in HBCUs. I wholeheartedly support that. But I think on a parallel path, we need to do the same thing, as I mentioned before, with private colleges so that kids can have the kind of experience that Defiance College kids have and have that opportunity to climb out of that situation and hit the racial divisions that are both economic and in terms of how we treat those citizens in those areas. So I think that's the combination that I would recommend that we do. And again, I think Biden has a chance to get, that's another bipartisan area I think he can get done. I really believe that.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts about this. Just as a campus comment, we have a task force on anti-racism, and we're looking at whiteness as a piece of this. And I know that's something that you believe needs to be addressed in the solution with policies, et cetera. And we've had a great team led by a faculty member and a staff member. So for those of you on campus, Alicia Yakos Brown and Mercedes Clay, who are helping us get definitions, common definitions. So we understand how to talk about and what we're talking about when we talk about what racism is and what policies we have that are okay and what policies we need to address that are racist in nature. What kinds of things can we do? And when we do them, how can they then ripple out and affect positively the communities beyond Defiance College? So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. This is a conversation that could go on for weeks.
I agree. That is terrific. And I truly believe, and now that I've been on a campus for 6 years working at a college and representing them for 200 years, I think colleges are uniquely positioned to shape the dialogue on these issues and not just talk about it, but actually do stuff that will mitigate the racial divide that is systemic. I really believe that. And anyone who's been on a college campus for more than 2 weeks can feel that. You were a leader at Damon, you're a leader at your college now. And I truly believe that the anti-racist tenor of the country can really be incubated well at colleges and universities. I truly believe that. And thank you for what you're doing.
Well, that was a pretty heavy topic. So, and it's an important topic. We don't want to make light of it. I'm going to, though, ask you to do something that's a little lighter, though, which is, you ended your opening comments with a quote, a recent quote, in a personal note to you from Joe Biden. So how does it feel on this stage of your life and career to enjoy personal relationship with the President of the United States? And how has that played out over your lifetime?
Well, let me quickly say that no one misunderstood. I'm still not sure that Joe Biden's going to come for a cookout or a barbecue in my backyard this summer, but the invitation is there, and who knows, he may walk his dog and come on over. But the fact that I worked with then Senator Biden on major legislation and other senators was really what has helped develop those historic relationships that I'll never forget when I was working in the Congress. And it's nothing unique to me. People have those relationships now. They just need to utilize them in a positive way to bring about constructive change. And I know that's going on in the Congress now, but it seems like it hasn't been the same over the last decade like it was back when I was working up on the Hill and Joe Biden was a senator. And frankly, one of the greatest thrills of my career was working with Ronald Reagan. We worked very closely with him and the vice president on major legislation. I worked with Secretary Jim Baker, who is one of the finest public servants I've ever known, on annual appropriation bills and policies. And he would come up and talk to us at any time. We always made time for him when we were in the majority, when they were in the majority. His door was always open to us. For example, when Ronald Reagan was shot, we fortuitously or ironically, the next day, we were to have the U.S. Secret Service up for what seemed like a mundane budget hearing. Well, it turned into be the biggest hearing in the history, maybe, of the country. We went from probably having no television coverage and 4 people in the audience to 96 cameras. And I was up all night, completely throwing out all my budget questions and asking and working with the White House about getting the Secret Service agent who jumped on top of Ronald Reagan, Jerry Parr, to come up and testify. Interviewing Jerry Parr at 3 a.m. after he just saved the life of the president was an interesting experience. And we had a great hearing. It was totally nonpartisan and really let the public see what a unfortunate moment it was and a heroic moment it was. So having that relationship with that administration allowed me to have that pivotal moment when we pivoted quickly with a national threat to have a hearing that let the country know what happened on that day at the Washington Hilton. I worked with Bob Dole, who's one of the funniest people I've ever met, one of the nicest people I've ever met, and one of the really good leaders, where he worked with us not only on that drug legislation, but on other issues in terms of border issues. When I worked for a senator from Arizona, Senator DeConcini, and we worked on other projects with Orrin Hatch, with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who you'll remember, reached out to Damon College, and frankly, because of our reputation, fostered largely by Dr. Mankey, that we were a leader in leading the charge against sexual assault on college campuses. And her interest was not only that, but sexual assault in the military. So she reached out to us. Kathy Hochul, the lieutenant governor of New York, reached out to us. And I believe we were the first college in the country to endorse Senator Gillibrand's sexual assault bill for women in the military. So in summary, what it gave me an opportunity to take those relationships and use them not for pictures on the wall signed by a senator or a congressman, but as ways to work on legislation and projects that really made a difference. And having those relationships and building them is important, just as important it is today as it was then. It's just not happening as quickly as I would like it to be as it did back then, when we could turn to a Jim Baker or to a Ronald Reagan or to a Kirsten Gillibrand and work on and get stuff done quickly based on those relationships. So my ability, if it is, and my good fortune to have those relationships has allowed me to be involved in some pretty historic stuff, which I've really enjoyed trying to help improve life for those that rely on us in the Congress.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm not going to ask you for further thoughts, but what I am going to do is on the subject of relationships, for you to share with our audience your experience in your junior high school dance when you asked a particularly prominent young lady to attend with you. Sorry, Bobby.
Now we're getting to the important stuff. Absolutely. Well, when I was in middle school at Sidwell Friends, Julie Nixon was in my class, and her sister was in my brother's class at Sidwell. And when Nixon was vice president, and it was bubbling up that Kennedy was going to run for president. And Julie Nixon, as many of you probably know, was extremely close to her father, very close. So we were, I guess dating is probably, you don't date with Secret Service guys hanging all over the car, but she and I went to the 7th and 8th grade dance at Sidwell with Secret Service in tow. We walk into the dance. Here are people with Kennedy buttons on among parents. Julie begins to feel a little uncomfortable, runs into the ladies' room. Secret Service agents guarding the door. I'm standing there wondering what has just happened to my date, and realize, as Donna Summer said, this was the last dance. And that was the end of my middle school relationship and romance with Julie Nixon.
Well, you've certainly had a long career and an interesting one. And everything that you've touched on today is just a piece of the intricacies of how those major things like NAFTA and Paris agreements come together. But thank you for sharing them today in the spirit of doing what it is that our McMaster School for Advancing Humanity sets out to do, which is to improve the human condition. So thank you very much, Bobby Mills, for sharing your thoughts and your comments today. And thank you for sharing some about you personally as you've navigated the emotions and staying on top of the tumultuousness and sharing a personal story from, I don't know, just a few years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago. Well, thank you. It's been an honor. I appreciate it. And I congratulate you and the McMaster School. You're doing incredible work. And it reinforces my feeling that colleges like Defiance College, they're a important part of the answer as we go forward and try to get really serious things done for really serious issues. And I'm proud to have been a part of this.
Well, and I think by mission, we absolutely agree with you. So thank you for sharing your time. Thank you to the audience for being attentive. Enjoy your day at the McMaster Symposium and the Academic Colloquium. You students and your work with faculty members, it's so important. And we sure look forward to hearing about your research and your experiences. So thank you. Enjoy the day. Bye-bye.